Look at this motorcycle. It was never painted. The frame is bare-pressed steel, plated silver with red leather for a seat. It is strange enough on its own. But someone bolted rockets to the back of one. Real rockets, solid fuel, strapped to a road bike, and aimed at 220 kilometers an hour. The man who did this was Fritz von Opel, grandson of the founder, and the German government forbade him from ever letting it run. Hold on to that ban. It is the tamest thing in this story. Because the company behind this machine was not a backstreet workshop chasing a stunt. In 1928, Opel was the largest bicycle maker on the planet. It was also the largest car maker in Germany. It built more than one in every 3 cars the country sold. This was an empire. And for 2 short years it built motorcycles. So why would a giant that sold cars by the 100,000 bother with 2 wheels at all? And why would the heir to that fortune try to turn one into a missile? Every week on this channel we tell the stories of the machines and the people who built them, the ones history nearly forgot. If these machines deserve to be remembered, subscribe and hit like. And stay with this one, because the biggest bicycle company on earth built a silver motorcycle it refused to paint, strapped gunpowder rockets to it, and then walked away from the whole idea inside of 2 years. This is the story of how Opel built a rocket and then let go of the throttle. If you have ever driven an Opel or pushed one of their bicycles up a hill, you already know half of this empire. You have never met the other half. Opel never got where it was by inventing things. It got there by building them better and cheaper than anyone alive. That is how it became the biggest bicycle maker on earth. By the 1920s, with a moving assembly line running since 1923, a finished Opel bicycle rolled off the end every 7 seconds. Keep that number in your head, because this is the company that would one day bolt rockets to one of its own machines. It ran the car business exactly the same way, stamping out a cheap little model called the Laubfrosch by the 100,000, driving the price down toward 2,000 marks until an Opel was simply the car the country drove. So why come back to motorcycles at all? Opel had built a few crude motorized bicycles once before, around 1901, and dropped them in a slump a few years later. But now, in the middle of the roaring 20s, motorcycling was booming across Germany, and Opel had a weapon nobody else in the trade had. A factory that could stamp steel by the mile. The obstacle was the frame. A normal motorcycle frame in 1928 was a nest of steel tubes, brazed together and aligned by hand, slow and expensive to make. Opel did not want tubes. It wanted a frame it could press out of flat sheet steel, the way it pressed a car body or a bicycle part, and stamp out in numbers. For that idea, Opel turned to one of the strangest men in German motoring, a designer named Ernst Neumann-Neander. He was not an engineer by training at all. He was an artist, a graphic designer, a poster maker, a cabaret performer who also raced cars and once ran the brutal Paris to Rome to Paris race. He could not stop redrawing machines until they looked like nothing else on the road. He even renamed himself. Neumann means new man, so he took the Greek for it and became Neander. And his idea for a motorcycle frame was pure heresy. Throw the tubes away. Stamp the whole frame out of steel plate, rivet it together like a small bridge, and then do not paint it. Plate it in dull silver cadmium instead, so it would never rust and never need a coat of paint at all. In 1926 he set up his own works in Düren and began building these silver machines under his own name, Neander, fitting them with whatever engines he could buy, from little Villiers singles to big JAPV twins. He would build only around 2,000 of them in his whole life. Opel bought a license to Neander's design, and out of it came the Opel Motoclub. It arrived at the Berlin Motor Show in 1928, and on a floor full of black-painted motorcycles, it looked like something from another decade. The frame was riveted, pressed steel. The front fork was a pendulum sprung on flat-leaf springs, and it was silver from nose to tail, the bare-plated metal left on show, with only the seat, the grips, and the tires finished in opal red. It was beautiful in a cold, industrial way, and it was quick to build. Where a rival firm might spend 20 to 25 hours assembling a frame by hand, Opel could put one of these together in about 4. That was the entire point. A motorcycle built the way Opel built everything else. Fast in volume, out of pressed steel. There were 2 versions sharing one engine of just under 500 cubic centimeters. The Motoclub Tour used a side valve version, 16 horsepower, good for about 105 kilometers an hour. The Motoclub Supersport used an overhead valve version of the same engine, 22 horsepower, and would run to around 120. The Supersport sold for 1,290 Reichsmarks. The Tour was 1,190. A full set of lights cost another 165 on top. This was not a poor man's machine. But it was clever, it was fast, and it carried the name of the most powerful industrial family in the country. Riders who threw a leg over one found something unusually modern underneath them. The pendulum fork on its leaf springs soaked up roads that hammered ordinary machines, and the bare silver body, cold and hard and unlike anything else in the showroom, told everyone at a glance which family had built it. The German press took it seriously. This was not a novelty, it was a real motorcycle from a company that did not build toys. And that family had a problem child, in the best possible sense. His name again was Fritz von Opel. He was the founder's grandson, he held a doctorate, and he ran the testing department and the advertising for the whole firm. Fritz had grown up surrounded by speed, and he had worked out something his uncles only half understood. That speed, turned into spectacle, could sell everything standing behind it. And in 1928, at the exact moment the Motoclub went on sale, Fritz von Opel fell in love with rockets. He was not working alone. He had teamed up with a rocket enthusiast named Max Valier, and, more importantly, a fireworks maker named Friedrich Sander, a man who actually knew how to build a solid fuel rocket that would burn hard and steady instead of simply blowing up. And the wildest thing the two of them ever helped him build rolled on two wheels. Someone in the Opel camp took a Motoclub Supersport, the silver-pressed steel motorcycle, and bolted Sander's rockets to the back of it. This is the machine from the very first frame. The engine was tuned up by some accounts to around 30 horsepower. The plan was as simple as it was insane. Get the bike up to speed on its engine, then fire the rockets, and chase a speed no motorcycle on Earth had any right to reach. Somewhere around 220 kilometers an hour. Here the story goes murky, and honesty matters more than a clean number. The sources do not agree on how many rockets the thing carried. Some say 6. Some say the number was later doubled. They do not even agree on whether it was ever run in front of a crowd at all, or only ever shown standing still at the Berlin exhibition. But they agree on the ending. The German authorities looked at a pressed steel motorcycle designed to reach highway speeds on gunpowder, and they refused to permit the record attempt. No rider is named in the records, no crash is written down. The most dangerous motorcycle Opel ever built may never have been allowed to prove what it could do. It exists today mostly as a photograph and a legend, which, given what it was, is probably the mercy it deserved. The rocket motorcycle did not come out of nowhere. All through 1928, Fritz von Opel had been strapping Sander's rockets to anything that would move in public for the cameras. The most famous run came on the 23rd of May, on the AVUS Speedway in Berlin, where Fritz climbed into a rocket car called the RAK-2, lit off 24 rockets one after another, and tore down the track at around 238 kilometers an hour. He did it in front of some 3,000 invited guests, and they were not ordinary guests. The film director Fritz Lang was in the crowd, and so was the boxer Max Schmeling. The car had small wings fitted to keep it down, and at full speed the nose still tried to lift off the ground. There was more where that came from, a rocket rail car that leapt off its tracks near Hanover, and a rocket plane that Fritz flew himself the following year. The newspapers could not get enough of any of it, and they handed him a nickname that stuck for the rest of his life. Raketen-Fritz, Rocket Fritz. And that is the thread running underneath this whole story. The very thing that let Opel build a rocket motorcycle was the same thing that made the motorcycle pointless. Opel was a machine for making millions of ordinary objects cheaply and selling them everywhere. The Motoclub was a beautiful sideshow. The rocket was pure theatre. And neither of them paid the way the bicycles and the cars did. All the showmanship that put Rocket Fritz on the front page of every paper in Europe could not hide one plain fact. Motorcycles were never the business. They were the advertisement. And the business was about to change hands. At the very start of 1929, the American giant General Motors moved in. By March, it had bought 80% of Opel. For General Motors, Opel was the way into Europe, the largest car maker in Germany, with the factories and the dealer network no American firm could build from scratch. 2 years later, in 1931, it bought the rest, paying the Opel family something on the order of $33 million, and taking full control of the company the family had spent 3 generations building. And General Motors had not crossed an ocean to sell silver motorcycles with fireworks strapped to them. It had come for the cars and for that share of the German market that no rival could touch. Then the timing turned cruel. The Great Depression rolled across Germany, and a 1,200 mark motorcycle was exactly the kind of thing ordinary people stopped buying overnight. A corporation selling a third of the nation's cars had no reason to keep a boutique motorcycle draining its accounts. The arithmetic was merciless and obvious. Opel had built somewhere close to 6,000 motor clubs. In 1930, after barely 2 years on sale, it stopped. The presses that could stamp out a frame in 4 hours went quiet, and Opel would never build another motorcycle again. There was one faint afterlife. In 1931, a handful of the pressed steel frames surfaced one last time under the name Elite-Opel, sold by another maker, and then that too was finished. The name Opel and the word motorcycle would never appear together again. The rocket dream died around the same time, and it died harder. Max Valier, the enthusiast who had helped light the fuse on the whole adventure, was killed in 1930 when a liquid fuel rocket exploded on his test bench. Friedrich Sander, the quiet fireworks maker who had actually built the rockets, was later arrested under the Nazi regime and died in prison in 1938. The circus that had put the Opel name on every front page in Europe was gone within a few years, and most of the men who built it were gone with it. So what was all of it for? Consider what survived. The pressed steel idea, the sheer nerve of stamping a frame instead of brazing one, did not die with the Motoclub. It kept resurfacing on machines for decades. The same instinct that stamped out car bodies finally turned loose on 2 wheels. And the tube frame that Opel tried to kill would spend the rest of the century slowly losing ground to pressed and welded steel. Ernst Neumann-Neander never stopped either. From his works in Düren, he went on turning out his strange silver machines, only a couple of thousand of them across his whole life, each one plated and left unpainted exactly like the Opel that had borrowed his idea. Today they are treasured precisely because there were so few, and because almost nobody else ever had the nerve to build a motorcycle that looked like a piece of factory tooling and meant it. And Rocket Fritz outlived nearly all of it. He walked away from the firm after the sale, drifted through Switzerland and France, was pulled off an ocean liner by the British in 1940 and held for 16 days, was briefly locked up in America 2 years later as a suspicious foreigner, and then simply lived long and quietly into the age of real rockets. Fritz von Opel died in 1971 in a village in the Swiss mountains, having lived to watch human beings ride to the moon on the very thing he had once strapped to a motorcycle for the cameras. And here is the quiet tragedy of the Motoclub. It was not a bad motorcycle. The Supersport was genuinely fast for its day, well past 120 kilometers an hour, and its pressed steel frame was years ahead of the hand-brazed tubes that everyone else was still welding by eye. It was clever. It was quick to build, and it worked. Opel simply decided that none of that mattered. A company that could stamp out a bicycle every 7 seconds looked at a motorcycle that demanded real engineering and real attention, and let it go without a backward glance. The machines that giants abandon are almost always the interesting ones. And the Motoclub itself? Around 120 of them are thought to survive. Opel keeps one, a running 1928 Supersport, in its own historic collection, as if to remember the 2 strange years it built motorcycles are all. A well-restored one now changes hands for something close to 20,000 euros. Sit with that contrast for a second. A motorcycle that cost about 1,290 marks in 1928, built by a company that measured everything it did in the millions and could not be bothered to keep making it, is worth a small fortune today for one reason. It is worth so much because the company that could have built 1 million of them chose instead to give up. Here is what I would like to know from you. Did your family ever own an Opel, a car, or one of those millions of bicycles, and did anyone ever mention that the same firm once built motorcycles too? Have you ever stood in front of a Motoclub in the metal, that bare silver frame sitting under museum lights? And if a company handed you a factory that could build almost anything, would you have spent 2 years building the strangest thing you could, or the smartest? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. Now go back to that first machine. A motorcycle that was never painted, built by the biggest bicycle maker in the world, with gunpowder rockets bolted to the back that it was never once allowed to fire. For 2 short years, the empire that made everything cheap and sensible made something reckless and beautiful and silver. Then it grew up, sold itself to Detroit, and never touched a motorcycle again. The rocket never ran, the record was never set. And that is exactly why we are still standing here, looking at it. Because the strangest machines are almost never the ones that worked. If you want another German idea that put its engine in a place no sane designer would dare, look for the Magola, a motorcycle with its motor spinning inside the front wheel. That went out and won a championship just to prove it was not a joke. That story's already waiting for you on this channel. Until the next machine.